5 years ago, I buried my only son. In the hospital, just before he died, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Mom, please take care of Lauren, his wife, my daughter-in-law. I promised him I would." And I kept that promise. Every single year since his funeral, I sent Lauren $65,000 to help her rebuild her life. I believed I was honoring my son. Until the day a stranger called me and said quietly, "Mrs. Smith, I live next door to your daughter-in-law, and I think she's lying to you." That one phone call shattered everything I thought I knew. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If someone you loved made you promise something before they died, how far would you go to keep that promise? If this story resonates with you, please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of it. And I'd love to know where you're watching from, comment your city and the current time there, and tell me honestly, would you have kept sending the money the way I did? Because what I discovered next changed everything. The moment Dorothy Whitman told me she lived next door to my daughter-in-law, something inside my chest tightened. At first, I didn't even understand why. Maybe it was simply the strangeness of the situation, a complete stranger calling me about Lauren. Or maybe it was the tone in Dorothy's voice, careful, hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mrs. Smith," she said gently, "I hope you don't think I'm interfering." I struggled for weeks deciding whether I should make this call. I stood in my backyard with the phone pressed against my ear, staring at the rose bushes Michael had planted for me 3 summers before he died. "Why would you need to call me?" I asked slowly. Dorothy hesitated again. "Well, I came across your name on a delivery package that arrived at Lauren's house. I wasn't snooping, I promise. The label was facing outward when the driver left it on the porch." I said nothing. She continued carefully. "I recognized your name because Lauren has mentioned you before." That part didn't surprise me. Lauren and I hadn't spoken as often over the past few years, but I had always assumed she still thought of me as family. "I'm listening," I said. Dorothy took a small breath. "I just wanted to ask you something, Mrs. Smith." "What is it? Are you the one supporting Lauren financially?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" I replied. Dorothy didn't answer immediately. Instead, she said something that made the quiet afternoon suddenly feel colder. "Because the life she's living doesn't look like someone who's struggling." My fingers tightened slightly around the phone. "Lauren never said she was struggling," I said quickly. Though even as the words left my mouth, I realized that wasn't entirely true. Lauren had mentioned difficulties from time to time: high rent, unstable hours at the boutique where she worked, unexpected bills. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of everyday financial pressure most people experience. And every time she mentioned those things, I felt reassured that the support I sent her was truly helping. Dorothy spoke again. "I don't want to upset you," she said quietly, "but I think you deserve to know what's happening next door." Her voice wasn't accusing. It sounded almost sympathetic. Still, my first instinct was to defend Lauren. "She's been through a lot," I said. "My son passed away 5 years ago. It devastated her." "I know," Dorothy replied softly. "She's told people in the neighborhood about that." Something about the way she said it made me pause. "What do you mean she's told people?" Dorothy seemed to realize she might have said too much. "Well, she talks about it sometimes, about losing her husband." "That's not unusual," I said. "No," Dorothy agreed. "Of course not." There was another pause. Then she added carefully, "But the story usually comes up during her parties." "Her parties?" "Yes." The word felt strange in my ears. "What kind of parties?" Dorothy let out a small sigh. "Large ones," she said. "At least once or twice a month." I blinked. That doesn't sound like Lauren. "Well, Dorothy said perhaps she's changed since moving here." I felt a ripple of uncertainty move through me. Lauren had always been social. Even before Michael died, she enjoyed hosting dinners and gatherings with friends, but large parties regularly. It didn't seem to match the picture she had painted during our last phone call. Just 2 months earlier, Lauren had told me she was worried about covering her rent. Dorothy continued speaking gently but firmly. "I don't know the details of your relationship," she said. "And again, I apologize if I'm overstepping." "You're not overstepping," I said automatically, though I wasn't sure yet if that was true. I've lived here long enough to recognize certain patterns." "What patterns?" "The cars." I frowned. "The cars, yes. What about them?" "Well, Lauren currently drives a Mercedes convertible." I didn't respond. Dorothy continued. "And sometimes there's a Range Rover parked in her driveway as well." My mind tried to process the information. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Oh yes," Dorothy said. "The Mercedes is silver. Very hard to miss." I leaned slowly against the wooden fence in my yard. Lauren had told me she owned an older sedan she bought used shortly after moving to Arizona. She had even complained about the repair costs. "Maybe she upgraded recently," I said, though. My voice sounded less confident now. Perhaps Dorothy replied. Another pause followed. Then Dorothy asked the question that changed the tone of the conversation entirely. "Mrs. Smith, can I ask you something personal?" "You already have," I said quietly. She gave a small, nervous laugh. "Yes, I suppose that's true. What do you want to know? How much money do you send her?" The directness of the question startled me. "I'm not sure that's appropriate," I replied. "I understand," Dorothy said quickly. "Please don't feel obligated to answer." But something about the situation made me respond anyway. $65,000 a year, I said. The silence on the line was immediate. For several seconds, Dorothy said nothing. Finally, she spoke again. "Oh my." Those two words sent a chill down my spine. "What does that mean?" I asked. Dorothy sounded almost regretful now. "It means..." "That explains a lot." "Explains what?" "The house." "What house?" "Lauren's house." I straightened. "She rents a place," I said. Dorothy hesitated. "Mrs. Smith, Lauren doesn't rent." My heart began beating a little faster. "What do you mean she doesn't rent?" "She owns the house," Dorothy said. "And it's not a small one." The quiet suburban sounds of my neighborhood suddenly felt distant. "What kind of house are we talking about?" I asked slowly. Dorothy answered gently. 4 bedrooms, large backyard, pool." I closed my eyes briefly. Lauren had told me her apartment was tiny. She said the rent was nearly draining her savings. "Maybe you're mistaken," I said. "I wish I were," Dorothy replied. Another pause stretched between us. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "I didn't call just because of the house." "What do you mean?" "There's something else." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "What?" Dorothy took a breath. "Mrs. Smith, the parties she hosts are usually themed." "Themed?" "Yes." "What kind of themes?" "Well, last month it was called the Widow's Night Out." I felt the air leave my lungs. "What did you say?" "That's what the banner said near the pool," Dorothy replied. "And during the party, Lauren gave a little speech." My hands began trembling. "What kind of speech?" Dorothy hesitated again. "The kind where she tells everyone about how her late husband left her everything, and how she rebuilt her life from tragedy." My chest tightened painfully. Michael had been gone 5 years. 5 years of grief. 5 years of honoring his memory. 5 years of believing I was helping the woman he loved. And now, standing there with the phone in my hand, I realized something for the very first time. Maybe I didn't know Lauren anymore. Or worse, maybe I never truly knew her at all. For several minutes after Dorothy Whitman finished speaking, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. The quiet on the phone stretched so long that she finally asked gently, "Mrs. Smith, are you still there?" "Yes," I said, though my voice sounded distant even to my own ears. My mind was struggling to process everything she had just told me. A house with 4 bedrooms, a pool, luxury cars, parties. None of it fit the picture Lauren had been painting for the past 5 years. "Maybe there's some misunderstanding," I said, finally clinging to the possibility that something had been exaggerated. Dorothy didn't sound convinced. "I hope there is," she replied softly. I took a slow breath. "Mrs. Whitman, how long have you lived next door to Lauren?" "Almost 2 years now," she said. 2 years. That meant this lifestyle, whatever it was, had been happening for quite a while. "Why did you decide to call today?" I asked. There was a brief pause before she answered. "'Cause last night there was another party," she said. "And during it, someone mentioned something that didn't sit right with me." "What was that?" "One of the guests asked Lauren how she could afford such an incredible home." My chest tightened. "And what did she say?" Dorothy's voice lowered slightly. "She said her late husband left her very well taken care of." I closed my eyes. Technically, that wasn't entirely false. Michael had always been responsible with money, but he certainly hadn't left behind the kind of wealth that could support luxury homes and endless parties. "Mrs. Smith," Dorothy added gently, "I'm not trying to cause trouble, but something about the way she said it didn't feel honest." "I understand," I murmured, and strangely enough, I believed her. Dorothy had nothing to gain by telling me this. If anything, making this call probably made her uncomfortable. After we ended the conversation, I sat down at my kitchen table and stared at the silent phone in front of me. My house felt unusually quiet. For 5 years, I had built a routine around honoring my promise to Michael. Every January, I transferred the money. Every few months, Lauren called to thank me. Every once in a while, she would mention some small financial challenge she was facing. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind me that my help mattered. But now those conversations replayed differently in my mind. I remembered the last phone call we had shared about 2 months earlier. Lauren had sounded tired. "Arizona is expensive," she had said with a small laugh. "Sometimes I feel like I'm barely keeping up." At the time, I had felt a wave of sympathy. "I'm glad I can help," I told her. And I meant it, because helping Lauren felt like helping Michael. After all, she had been his wife, the woman he chose to build a life with. That had to mean something. I pushed my chair back from the table and walked slowly toward the living room. On the wall hung a framed photograph of Michael in his firefighter uniform. He was smiling in the picture, one arm casually resting on the red truck behind him. That smile used to make me feel proud. Now it made my chest ache. Did I misunderstand something I whispered to the empty room? Of course, the photograph didn't answer. I sat down on the couch and tried to think logically. Maybe Dorothy was exaggerating. Maybe the house belonged to someone Lauren was living with temporarily. Maybe the Mercedes was borrowed. Maybe the parties were rare events. There were dozens of possible explanations, but there was also one simple way to start finding the truth. I picked up my phone and dialed Lauren's number. She answered on the third ring. "Patricia," she said brightly, "it's so good to hear from you." Her cheerful tone immediately softened some of my doubts. "Hi, Lauren," I replied. "How are you?" "I'm doing okay," she said. "Just busy with work lately." "Still at the boutique?" I asked casually. "Yes," she said quickly. "We've been getting a lot of spring inventory." Her answer came so easily. Too easily. I forced myself to sound relaxed. "That's good. I was actually thinking about visiting Arizona sometime soon." There was a tiny pause on the line. "Oh," she said. "Yes," I continued. "It's been a long time since we saw each other in person." Another small pause. "Well, Scottsdale is beautiful this time of year," she replied. The way she said it felt polite, distant, not exactly enthusiastic. "Maybe I could stay with you for a few days," I suggested gently. The silence that followed was impossible to ignore. Finally, Lauren said, "My place is actually pretty small." That sentence echoed loudly in my mind. Pretty small. Dorothy had just described a 4-bedroom home. "Oh," I said slowly, "I wouldn't want to impose." No, it's not," that Lauren added quickly. "It's just, the guest space isn't really set up." "I understand." We spoke for a few more minutes after that. The conversation stayed light. Safe topics. Weather. Work. Eventually, Lauren said she needed to go because she was meeting a friend for dinner. After we hung up, I stared at the phone again. The doubt that had started as a small ripple earlier that afternoon was growing stronger. Not because of what Lauren said, but because of what she didn't say. If she truly lived in a tiny apartment, why hesitate when I suggested visiting? Why not say yes immediately? Why not invite me warmly? I leaned back against the couch and exhaled slowly. For the first time in 5 years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Suspicion, and yet another thought began forming quietly in the back of my mind. A thought that made my stomach twist. I had been sending Lauren $65,000 every year. 5 years. That meant a total of $325,000. I had never once asked for details about how the money was used. Never asked for proof of financial need. Never questioned anything, because trust had always felt like the right thing to give. But now, for the first time, I wondered something I had never allowed myself to consider. What if the person I was helping wasn't the person I thought she was? That night, I barely slept. Dorothy's words echoed through my mind again and again. Luxury cars, pool parties, a large house, and Lauren telling people her late husband had left her well taken care of. Sometime around 2 a.m, I sat up in bed and turned on the lamp beside me, the room filled with soft yellow light. I reached for my laptop on the nightstand. If Lauren truly had built a new life in Arizona, there had to be some trace of it online. Social media, business listings, anything. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Part of me still didn't want to look, because once I started searching, there would be no going back. But eventually curiosity won. I opened the browser, typed Lauren's name, and pressed enter. I had no idea that what I was about to find would make Dorothy's warning seem small compared to the truth waiting ahead. When I pressed the enter on Lauren's name, I expected to see something simple. Maybe a LinkedIn profile, perhaps a few old photographs from when she and Michael were still together. Nothing dramatic. But what appeared on my screen instead made my stomach tighten. The first result wasn't a boutique listing. It wasn't a job page. It was an Instagram account. The profile picture showed Lauren standing beside a swimming pool wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and large sunglasses. Her smile was confident, almost glamorous. The username read Lauren Lives Bright. Underneath it was a short description. Widow, survivor, rebuilding life one beautiful day at a time. I stared at the screen. There were nearly 85,000 followers. My hand moved slowly to the mouse. I clicked the profile. The page filled with photographs, travel pictures, luxury restaurants, sunsets over beaches, designer handbags carefully placed beside sparkling cocktails. Lauren looked different in these photos. Not sad. Not struggling. Not exhausted. She looked radiant, confident, successful. My eyes drifted toward the captions under the images. One read, 5 years ago, tragedy took everything from me, but life always gives us a second chance. Another said, learning to celebrate the beauty of starting over. The posts were polished, carefully curated, and every few photographs included some reference to Michael. My late husband taught me how precious life is. I carry his memory into every new adventure. At first glance, it looked touching, but something about it felt performative, almost like a script. I scrolled further. One post showed Lauren sitting beside the very same silver Mercedes Dorothy had mentioned. The caption read, finally rewarding myself after years of rebuilding. Years of rebuilding. My chest tightened. I leaned closer to the screen. The date of the post was from 8 months ago. Another image appeared. Lauren standing beside a large modern house. Behind her was a wide patio with outdoor furniture and what looked unmistakably like a swimming pool. The caption read, grateful for every blessing that came after the storm. I exhaled slowly. Dorothy hadn't exaggerated. If anything, she had understated it. My eyes moved to the comments beneath the photo. Hundreds of people had responded. You're such an inspiration. Your story gives me hope. So proud of how far you've come. Lauren replied warmly to many of them, thanking them, encouraging them, sharing small reflections about grief and resilience. To an outsider, it probably looked beautiful. A young widow rebuilding her life, turning pain into strength. But sitting there in my quiet living room, I felt something else. Confusion. Because none of these posts mentioned me. Not once. No mention of the woman who had quietly sent over $300,000 to help that rebuilding happen. My son's memory was part of Lauren's story, but I wasn't. I kept scrolling. More trips, more restaurants, more photographs of gatherings with friends beside the pool. Then one video caught my attention. It was from one of the parties Dorothy had mentioned. Music played in the background. String lights hung over the backyard. Guests stood around holding drinks while Lauren stood near the pool giving what looked like a toast. Someone had recorded it and posted a short clip. I turned the volume up. Lauren's voice filled the room. I know the past few years have been hard, she said to the group, smiling. Losing my husband changed my life forever. A few people nodded sympathetically. But sometimes, she continued, raising her glass slightly, the hardest chapters lead us to the most beautiful new beginnings. The guests clapped. I sat frozen. Lauren looked happy, truly happy. That wasn't what hurt. People are allowed to heal. They're allowed to move forward. What hurt was the realization that while she had been building this life, she had still been accepting my money, still telling me she was struggling, still describing a tiny apartment that apparently didn't exist. I closed the laptop slowly. The room felt unusually heavy. For 5 years, I had believed my support was helping Lauren survive. Now it appeared it might have been helping her thrive in ways she never told me about. But another thought quietly surfaced. Maybe the social media account exaggerated things. People often present glamorous versions of their lives online. Maybe the house wasn't really hers. Maybe the car was borrowed. Maybe the parties were sponsored events. There were still explanations. There had to be, because the alternative meant something I wasn't ready to accept yet. The next morning, my phone rang again. Dorothy Whitman. Mrs. Smith, she asked. Yes. I just wanted to check on you, she said gently. I hope I didn't upset you too much yesterday. I hesitated. No, I said honestly. You didn't upset me, but you did make me curious. Oh, I looked Lauren up online last night. Dorothy sighed softly. Then you probably saw some of the same things I've been seeing. I did. Another quiet pause passed between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing in my mind all night. Mrs. Whitman, do you know if Lauren owns that house? I believe she does, Dorothy said. How can you tell? Well, property records in our neighborhood are public, she explained. A few months ago, a neighbor mentioned that Lauren purchased the house shortly after moving in. Purchased, not rented. Purchased. My stomach tightened again. Do you happen to know when that was? I asked. About 2 years ago, Dorothy said. 2 years. Which meant Lauren had bought the house while still receiving my yearly payments. Mrs. Smith Dorothy added gently, I'm sorry to bring you into this, but I felt it was wrong to stay silent. No, I said quietly. You did the right thing. After we ended the call, I walked slowly to the window in my living room. The morning sun had begun lighting up the neighborhood. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary. But inside my mind, a quiet decision was beginning to form. For 5 years, I had trusted Lauren completely. Maybe it was time to stop relying on secondhand information. Maybe it was time to see things for myself. I walked back to the kitchen table, opened my laptop again, and searched for the next available flight from Denver to Phoenix. The departure time was early the following morning. My finger hovered over the booking button for only a moment. Then I clicked it. If Lauren truly had built a new life in Arizona, I wanted to understand what that life really looked like. And if Dorothy was right about the things happening next door, then the truth was waiting for me there. I didn't sleep much the night before my flight. Even after booking the ticket to Phoenix, my mind refused to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, the same questions repeated themselves. Was Dorothy mistaken? Had I misunderstood Lauren's life? Or had I truly been deceived for 5 years? At 3 a.m, I gave up trying to sleep and went into the kitchen. The house was dark except for the soft yellow light above the stove. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the small wooden table Michael had helped me assemble years ago. My eyes drifted again to the photograph hanging on the wall. Michael in his firefighter uniform. Confident. Proud. Alive. I'm trying to keep my promise, I murmured quietly. The words felt heavier now than they ever had before. For 5 years, that promise had guided every decision I made regarding Lauren. I had never once questioned whether she truly needed my help, not because I was naive, but because I believed trust was part of honoring Michael's memory. Still, something about Dorothy's warning had planted a seed of doubt I could no longer ignore, and doubt once planted grows quickly. By the time dawn arrived, I had packed a small suitcase and printed my boarding pass. The airport was already busy when I arrived. Travelers hurried through security lines. Announcements echoed overhead. Coffee machines hissed behind counters as tired passengers lined up for their morning caffeine. I moved through it all quietly, almost mechanically. Inside my head, the same thoughts kept circling. Maybe this trip would prove Dorothy wrong. Maybe Lauren really had struggled at first, but later found success. Maybe everything had a simple explanation. I hope so, because the alternative meant confronting something much more painful. The flight to Phoenix lasted just under 2 hours. I spent most of it staring out the window as the Colorado mountains slowly faded behind us. Michael used to love flying. When he was younger, he would press his face against the airplane window just like the children seated across the aisle from me now. Look at that, he would say excitedly whenever the plane passed over clouds. I swallowed hard and turned my gaze away from the memory. When the plane finally landed, the Arizona heat hit me the moment I stepped outside the terminal. It was warmer than Denver, brighter somehow. Palm trees lined the streets near the airport. Everything looked sunlit and calm. Too calm for the storm quietly building inside me. I rented a small sedan and typed the address Dorothy had given me into the navigation system. The drive to Scottsdale took about 40 minutes. At first, the roads were crowded with city traffic, but gradually the scenery shifted. Wider streets, newer buildings, clean sidewalks, and then the neighborhoods began changing. The houses grew larger, more spacious. Manicured lawns stretched across wide properties. When the navigation system finally announced I had reached the street Dorothy described, my heart started beating faster. The neighborhood was quiet, gated, elegant. Tall desert trees lined both sides of the road. I slowed the car as I approached the address. Then I saw it. Lauren's house. Dorothy hadn't exaggerated. If anything, she had been conservative in her description. The house was large and modern, with smooth white walls and wide glass windows reflecting the bright afternoon sun. A curved driveway led up to the front entrance, and parked beside the garage was the unmistakable silver Mercedes convertible I had seen in Lauren's photographs. I pulled the car to the side of the road and sat there for a moment. The engine idled softly. My hands rested on the steering wheel. For several seconds, I simply stared at the house. This was not the home of someone barely making rent. This was the home of someone thriving. I stepped out of the car slowly. The air felt dry and warm against my skin. Across the street, a woman in her 70s sat on a shaded porch reading a book. She looked up as I approached the sidewalk. "Mrs. Whitman?" I asked cautiously. The woman closed her book and stood. "Yes," she said with a gentle smile. "You must be Patricia." Her voice matched the one from the phone. Soft, careful, kind. We shook hands. "I'm sorry to bring you all the way out here," she said, "but I felt it was better for you to see things yourself." "You did the right thing," I replied quietly. Dorothy gestured toward Lauren's house. "She's not home right now," she said. "How do you know?" "Well, Dorothy explained her Mercedes left about half an hour ago." I nodded slowly. Standing there in person made the reality harder to ignore. The large windows, the immaculate landscaping, the swimming pool visible behind the backyard fence. This was no small apartment. Dorothy studied my face with concern. "I imagine this must be difficult." "It is," I admitted. We walked slowly down the sidewalk together. "Lauren moved in about 2 years ago," Dorothy said. "At first she seemed very quiet, kept mostly to herself. What changed?" "The parties," Dorothy replied. "They started about 6 months after she arrived." "How big are they?" Dorothy gave a small laugh. "Big enough that the street fills with parked cars." I glanced again at the house. It was easy to imagine the backyard full of people, music, laughter, glasses clinking, all happening while I believed Lauren was struggling to survive. "Have you ever spoken to her?" I asked. "A few times," Dorothy said. "She's polite, friendly even. But there's always a certain distance." I understood what she meant. Lauren had sounded the same during our phone calls recently. Friendly, but distant. Almost like we were acquaintances rather than family. Dorothy gestured toward the driveway. "You see that SUV parked there sometimes?" she asked. I noticed a large black Range Rover parked in front of the neighboring house. "Yes, that's usually parked here during the parties," she said. "Belongs to one of her frequent guests." "Do you know who—" Dorothy shook her head. "Not exactly, but he seems important." Before I could ask more, something caught Dorothy's attention. She glanced down the street. "Oh," she said quietly, "looks like she's back." I followed her gaze. The silver Mercedes was turning slowly onto the street. My heart immediately started racing. Lauren's car moved closer. Sunlight reflected brightly off the polished metal. For a moment I considered stepping back behind the parked cars. Maybe observing quietly first would be better. But it was too late. The Mercedes pulled into the driveway. The engine shut off, and Lauren stepped out. She looked exactly like she did in the photographs. Confident, elegant, sunglasses resting on her head. Her eyes lifted toward the sidewalk. And then she froze, because she had just recognized the last person she ever expected to see standing in front of her house. Me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Lauren stood beside the open door of her silver Mercedes, her hand still resting on the top of the car. The Arizona sunlight reflected off the windshield, making it hard to see her expression clearly at first. Then she slowly removed her sunglasses. Our eyes met. The shock on her face was unmistakable. "Patricia," she said, her voice filled with confusion. I could hear the question underneath her words. "What are you doing here?" I took a slow breath and stepped forward. "Hello, Lauren." Dorothy Whitman quietly excused herself and retreated back toward her porch, clearly sensing this conversation wasn't meant for her. Lauren closed the car door slowly and walked a few steps toward me. What are you doing in Arizona?" she asked. Her tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't exactly warm either. "I thought it might be nice to visit," I said calmly. She blinked. "You should have told me you were coming." "Yes," I replied. "Perhaps I should have." Lauren glanced briefly toward her house as if calculating something in her mind. Then she forced a small smile. "Well, it's a surprise, but I'm glad you're here." The words sounded polite. Too polite. She gestured toward the front door. "Do you want to come inside?" I nodded. We walked up the curved driveway together. Every step made the reality harder to ignore. The landscaping was immaculate. Large potted plants framed the entrance. The front door itself was made of dark wood with modern glass panels. Nothing about this house suggested financial struggle. Lauren unlocked the door and stepped inside first. "Sorry about the mess," she said casually. But when I entered the house behind her, there was no mess. The interior looked like something from a home design magazine. High ceilings, bright white walls, modern furniture arranged carefully around a large living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the backyard pool. The air smelled faintly of citrus and expensive candles. I stood there quietly for a moment. "This is beautiful," I said. Lauren smiled slightly. Thank you. Her answer was simple, too simple. She didn't explain how she had afforded it. She didn't mention buying the house. She didn't say anything at all about the life she had built here. Can I get you something to drink, she asked. Water would be fine. Lauren walked toward the kitchen, which opened directly into the living room. I followed slowly. The kitchen counters were made of white marble. A large island stood in the center of the room with sleek bar stools lined along one side. Lauren opened the refrigerator and poured water into 2 glasses. As she handed one to me, I noticed something else. A large framed photograph on the wall behind her. Lauren stood beside a group of people at what looked like a beach resort. Everyone was smiling, laughing, holding drinks. I didn't recognize any of them. This place must cost quite a bit, I said quietly. Lauren hesitated. It's comfortable, she replied. Comfortable. That was an interesting way to describe a house like this. We sat down at the kitchen island. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Lauren seemed unusually tense. Finally, she asked, How long are you staying in Arizona? I'm not sure yet, I said. Her eyes flickered slightly. You could have stayed here, you know. I looked around the enormous kitchen. That's kind of you to offer. Another pause settled between us. Lauren took a sip of water. So, what made you decide to visit all of a sudden? There it was. The real question. I leaned back slightly in the chair. I suppose curiosity, I said. Curiosity? Yes. Lauren frowned slightly. About what? I glanced toward the window overlooking the pool. It seems like you've built quite a life here. Her shoulders stiffened just a little. I've tried to move forward, she said carefully. Of course, I replied. That's natural. I studied her face for a moment. You mentioned during our last phone call that things were financially difficult. Lauren's eyes shifted away from mine. Well, they were. Yes. She spoke quickly now. The boutique has been doing better lately. I've picked up some additional opportunities. Opportunities? Online partnerships, she said vaguely. That explanation didn't match what I had seen on her Instagram page, but I didn't confront her about that yet. Instead, I asked a simpler question. Do you own this house? Lauren blinked. Yes. Her answer came quickly. Then she added, I saved for a long time. Saved. The word echoed strangely in my mind. Saved. While receiving $65,000 from me every year. I folded my hands calmly on the counter. That's impressive, I said. Lauren gave a small nod. Thank you. Again, no further explanation. The conversation felt like 2 people carefully stepping around something neither wanted to name. Finally, I spoke again. Lauren, how much did this house cost? She hesitated longer this time. A little over $800,000, she admitted. $800,000! I let the number sit quietly in the air. That must have required a significant down payment. Yes, she said. Where did the money come from? Lauren's eyes lifted toward mine again. The tension in the room thickened instantly. What do you mean, she asked. I said gently, I thought you were struggling financially. Her expression hardened slightly. I never said I was poor, Patricia. No, I agreed, but you did say rent was difficult. Well, that was before things improved. Improved how? Lauren set her glass down slowly. Why are you asking me all these questions? I met her gaze calmly. Because I'm trying to understand something. And what exactly are you trying to understand? I leaned forward slightly. How you managed to build this life while still accepting my money every year. The words hung heavily between us. Lauren's face went completely still. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she asked quietly, Who told you? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I glanced toward the front window. Across the street, Dorothy Whitman was still sitting on her porch, watching. I turned back to Lauren. Does it matter, I said? Lauren's jaw tightened. You could have just asked me directly. I tried, I replied softly. When? During our phone calls. Lauren looked away again. Those phone calls suddenly felt very far away. Finally, she spoke. You offered the money, she said. Her tone was calm, almost dismissive. You said it was a gift. Yes, I said. I did. But gifts usually come with honesty. Lauren's eyes flashed. I never lied. The sentence landed like a stone. I felt something inside my chest shift. Because deep down, I already knew the next question I needed to ask. And I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Still, I asked it anyway. Lauren, is there anything else about your life that you haven't told me? For the first time since I arrived, Lauren looked genuinely uncomfortable. She stared down at the kitchen counter. Then she whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Yes. My heart skipped. What I asked? Lauren exhaled slowly. There is something. She lifted her eyes again. And the truth she was about to reveal would change everything I thought I knew about the past 5 years. For a long moment after Lauren admitted there was something she hadn't told me, the room felt strangely smaller. The bright Arizona sunlight streamed through the tall windows behind her, casting reflections across the polished marble counter. Everything in the house looked beautiful, carefully designed, almost peaceful. But the quiet tension between us felt anything but peaceful. Lauren rested both hands on the kitchen island and stared down at the surface. I waited. Over the years, working as a school principal had taught me something important about difficult conversations. Silence often reveals more truth than pressure. Finally, Lauren spoke. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said softly. "Tell me what—" She lifted her head slowly. "There's a lot you don't know about what happened after Michael died." My chest tightened at the mention of my son's name. "What kind of things?" I asked carefully. Lauren hesitated. "Financial things." I folded my hands calmly in front of me. "Go on." Lauren took a deep breath. "When Michael passed away, the insurance company contacted me a few weeks after the funeral." I frowned slightly. "Insurance company?" "Yes." "What insurance?" Lauren's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Michael had a life insurance policy through the fire department." My stomach dropped. "A policy?" "Yes." "How much?" Lauren's voice grew quieter. "About $1.2 million. For a moment, the number didn't register. It just floated in the air between us. Then it settled into place. $1.2 million. I stared at her. "You received $1.2 million after Michael died." Lauren nodded slowly. "Yes." The room suddenly felt very still. For 5 years, I had believed Lauren was struggling to rebuild her life. 5 years of hearing about expensive rent. 5 years of hearing about part-time work at a boutique. 5 years of quietly sending money because I believed she needed help. "You never told me," I said quietly. Lauren looked down again. "I didn't think it mattered." My voice sharpened slightly. "You didn't think it mattered?" "It was between Michael and me," she said defensively. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Lauren, I have sent you $65,000 every year for 5 years." She said nothing. "That's $325,000. Still nothing. And the entire time you already had more than $1 million. Lauren crossed her arms. "You offered the money." "Yes," I replied calmly, "because I believed you were struggling." Lauren sighed. "I was struggling. How?" "With grief," she said quickly. I closed my eyes for a moment. Grief. The word carried enormous weight. No one who has lost someone close can dismiss it easily. But grief and financial hardship are not the same thing. When I opened my eyes again, Lauren was watching me carefully. "You said you wanted me to rebuild my life," she continued. "I did. And I did exactly that." "Yes," I said, quietly, glancing around the luxurious kitchen. "That much is clear." Lauren's expression hardened slightly. "Are you angry with me?" I considered the question carefully. Anger would have been easier. Cleaner. But what I felt was more complicated than that. "I'm confused," I admitted. "About what?" "About why you never told me the truth." Lauren shrugged slightly. "You never asked." The simplicity of that answer stunned me. "You're right," I said slowly. "I didn't." Another silence filled the room. Finally, I spoke again. "When did you buy this house?" 2 years ago. So 3 years after Michael died. "Yes." "And during those 3 years, you still accepted the money I sent you?" Lauren nodded. "Yes." "Even though you had the insurance money?" "Yes." The calm way she said it felt almost surreal. I leaned forward slightly. "Lauren, do you understand why that might feel dishonest?" She hesitated. "I didn't lie to you. You also didn't tell me the truth." Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't think you would stop sending the money." The honesty of the statement stunned me. "You didn't think I would stop?" "No." "Why?" "Because it made you feel good," she said. I stared at her. "What?" "You liked helping," Lauren continued. "It helped you feel connected to Michael." The words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Part of me hated that she might be right. Helping her had made me feel like I was still honoring my son, still fulfilling the promise I made beside his hospital bed. Lauren continued, speaking her tone calmer now. "Look, Patricia, I never forced you to send the money." "That's true. You chose to." "Yes, and I accepted it." I looked around the house again. The pool outside, the expensive furniture, the polished marble counters. "You accepted it very well," I said quietly. Lauren's eyes flashed with irritation. "You're making it sound like I stole from you." "I didn't say that. But that's what you're implying." "I'm saying you allowed me to believe something that wasn't true." Lauren looked away again. "I didn't think it mattered," she repeated. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then another thought surfaced in my mind, a thought that made my stomach tighten again. "Lauren," I said slowly. "Yes. Is the insurance money how you paid for this house?" She shook her head. "Not entirely." "What do you mean?" Lauren hesitated again. Then she said something that surprised me. "I had help." "Help?" "Yes." "From who?" She looked toward the large living room windows. "Someone I met here." My heart began beating faster. "Someone you met?" Lauren nodded. "Yes." "What's his name?" She hesitated for a moment longer. Then she said quietly, "Jason." The name hung in the air. "Jason, who?" I asked. "Jason Carter." "Who is he?" Lauren looked slightly uncomfortable again. "He works in real estate." "And how exactly did he help you buy an $800,000 house?" Lauren exhaled slowly. "We bought it together." The sentence echoed in my ears. "We bought it together." I felt a slow, cold realization begin spreading through my chest. "You and Jason bought this house together?" "Yes." "And who exactly is Jason Carter to you?" Lauren didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked directly into my eyes. Then she said the one thing I hadn't expected to hear. "He's my husband." The word struck me like a sudden gust of wind. "Husband?" I repeated. Lauren nodded. "We got married 2 years ago." 2 years. 2 years of sending money. 2 years of believing she was still living alone. 2 years of believing she was still the grieving widow of my son. "You remarried," I said slowly. "Yes." "And you never told me." Lauren looked slightly uncomfortable. "I didn't think it would change anything." But it did. In that moment, something deep inside me shifted. Because the promise I made to Michael had always been based on one assumption, that Lauren was alone, that she needed someone to support her. Now I realized something I hadn't considered before. Lauren hadn't been alone for a long time, and I had been the last person to know. For several seconds after Lauren told me she had remarried, I simply stared at her. The word husband echoed in my mind like something that didn't quite belong in the conversation. For 5 years, Lauren had been Michael's widow in my mind. That identity had shaped everything: our conversations, my support, the promise I made. But now she was standing in front of me in her bright Scottsdale kitchen, casually revealing that she had been married to someone else for 2 years. 2 years. 2 years of phone calls where she never mentioned him. 2 years of accepting my money while building a life with another man. I took a slow breath. "Jason Carter," I repeated. "Yes." "And he's your husband?" Lauren nodded. "Yes." I studied her face carefully. There was no shame there, no hesitation, just quiet acceptance, as if this was a perfectly reasonable piece of information that simply hadn't come up before. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked. Lauren shifted slightly. "I wasn't hiding it, but you also weren't sharing it." She sighed. "Patricia, I didn't think it mattered." That sentence again. It seemed to be her answer for everything. I folded my hands together on the marble countertop. "Did Jason know about the money I was sending you?" Lauren's eyes flickered. "Yes, and he thought that was acceptable. He didn't question it." "Why not?" Lauren shrugged slightly. "Because it wasn't hurting anyone." I leaned back in my chair. That statement landed heavily. Not hurting anyone. $325,000. 5 years of believing I was helping my son's grieving wife survive. And the entire time she had been building a new marriage, a new home, a new life. "You never once mentioned him," I said quietly. Lauren met my eyes. "You never asked." That answer again. Technically true, emotionally empty. I glanced around the house once more. "So Jason helped you buy this place?" "Yes." "Where is he now?" "At work." "What kind of work?" "Real estate development." "That explains the house." Lauren nodded. "He has good connections." I considered that for a moment. "Does he live here?" "Of course he does," Lauren replied. "Then why didn't you ever tell me you had remarried?" Lauren rubbed her temples briefly. "Because I didn't want to complicate things." "What things?" She looked directly at me. "Our relationship." The honesty in her voice surprised me. "What do you mean?" I asked. Lauren exhaled slowly. "You and I, our connection was built around Michael." "Yes," I said quietly. If I suddenly introduced a new husband into that dynamic, I thought it might make things awkward. A word enough to hide it for 2 years. She hesitated. "I didn't hide it. You omitted it." Lauren didn't argue with that. Instead, she asked something unexpected. "Are you angry with me because I moved on?" The question hung in the air between us. "No," I said honestly. "You're allowed to move on." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "But I wish you had been honest about it." Lauren looked down again. "I didn't think it was necessary." "Necessary," I repeated. "Yes." "For who?" "For you," she said. That answer caught me off guard. "For me?" Lauren nodded. You were still grieving. Of course I was. And I didn't want to make you feel like Michael had been replaced. The explanation sounded thoughtful, but something about it didn't fully convince me. Lauren, I said slowly, remarrying doesn't replace someone who died. She didn't respond. Instead, she looked toward the large living room window again. Outside, the bright blue water of the pool shimmered in the sunlight. After a moment, she spoke again. You need to understand something. What? The life I have now, I built it myself. Did you? Yes, with Jason's help. And with my money, I added quietly. Lauren's eyes hardened. You're making it sound like I manipulated you. I'm asking you to recognize the situation. She leaned forward slightly. Patricia, when Michael died, my entire life collapsed. I know. I lost my husband, my future, everything we planned together. I understand that. So if the support you gave helped me rebuild something, isn't that what you wanted? The question forced me to pause. Part of me wanted to say yes, because in some ways she was right. I had wanted her to rebuild. I had wanted her to survive. But another part of me felt deeply unsettled. Because rebuilding was one thing, building a luxury lifestyle while pretending to struggle was another. You told me you were barely keeping up with rent, I said quietly. Lauren looked uncomfortable again. At the time, things were uncertain. You owned this house. I had just bought it. That was 2 years ago. Yes. And you still told me rent was difficult. Lauren didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked something else. Why does it matter now? The bluntness of the question caught me off guard. What do you mean? You've already sent the money, she said. You can't take it back. That's true. So what exactly are you hoping to accomplish by confronting me? I stared at her. For the first time since arriving, I realized something clearly. Lauren didn't see this situation the same way I did. To her, the money was simply a gift that had helped her life improve. To me, it had been part of something sacred, a promise made to my dying son. Lauren, I said slowly, do you remember the last thing Michael asked me before he died? Her expression softened slightly. Yes. What did he say? He asked you to take care of me. That's right. And I did. Lauren nodded. You did. For 5 years. Yes. But that promise was built on the belief that you needed someone to look after you. Lauren's voice grew quiet. I did need that. For how long? She hesitated. I don't know. Until you received the $1.2 million. Lauren looked uncomfortable again. That money didn't make the grief disappear. I'm not saying it did. But it gave you security. Yes. And then you married Jason. Yes. So at what point, I asked gently, did you stop needing my help? Lauren opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence answered the question better than any words could have. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren said quietly, Are you going to stop sending the money? The directness of the question startled me. I hadn't even mentioned the payments yet, but clearly she had already been thinking about them. I leaned back slowly in my chair. For 5 years, I said I believed I was helping you survive. Lauren watched me carefully. Now I realized something else. What? You didn't need me nearly as much as I thought you did. Her eyes searched my face. So, what does that mean? I stood up slowly from the chair. It means, I said quietly, that I need some time to think. Lauren looked uncertain. Think about what my promise to Michael was really supposed to mean. I walked toward the large living room window. Outside, the bright Arizona sky stretched endlessly above the neighborhood. For 5 years, I had believed helping Lauren was the only way to honor my son's memory. Now I wasn't so sure, and the decision I was about to make would change both of our lives. I stood by the large living room window for a long time after telling Lauren I needed time to think. Outside, the Arizona sun hung high in the sky, bright and relentless. The water in the backyard pool shimmered like polished glass. Everything about the scene felt calm, comfortable, even luxurious. It was a life very different from the one I had imagined for Lauren over the past 5 years. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of Lauren moving around the kitchen. A cabinet door opened, then closed. Ice clinked softly into a glass. She was giving me space. Or perhaps she simply didn't know what else to say. Eventually, I turned back toward her. Lauren was leaning against the kitchen island, arms crossed loosely, watching me. Her expression wasn't defensive anymore. If anything, she looked slightly tired. I didn't expect this conversation today, she admitted quietly. Neither did I replied. She gave a small nod. I suppose Dorothy across the street must have called you. I didn't confirm it, but the look on my face must have been enough. Lauren sighed. She's always watching the neighborhood. She seemed concerned. Well, she's retired, Lauren said with a shrug. Watching people is practically a hobby for some of them. Her attempt to lighten the mood didn't quite work. The tension in the room remained. I walked back toward the kitchen island and sat down again. Lauren did the same. For a moment, we studied each other in silence. Then I asked a question that had been lingering in my mind since she mentioned Jason. Does Jason know about Michael? Lauren frowned slightly. Of course he does. What exactly does he know? That Michael was my husband and that he passed away 5 years ago. Does he know I've been sending you money every year? Lauren hesitated briefly. Yes, and he's comfortable with that arrangement. He never questioned it. Not once, no. I considered that. Have I met him before I asked? Lauren shook her head. No. Does he know I'm here today? No. Will he be home soon? Lauren glanced at the clock on the wall. Probably within the next hour. The thought made me uneasy, not because I feared meeting him, but because I realized something strange about the situation. For 5 years, Lauren had remained connected to my life through the memory of Michael. Now she had an entirely different life, one that included a husband I had never even heard of. And somehow, both lives had existed at the same time. I leaned forward slightly. Lauren, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Did you ever plan to tell me about Jason? She thought about that question longer than I expected. Finally, she said maybe someday. Someday? Yes. When it felt less complicated. I nodded slowly. That could have taken a very long time. Lauren didn't deny that. Another silence filled the room. Then she asked something carefully. Are you planning to tell anyone about this? Tell who? Friends, Mez's family. I thought about that. There isn't much family left, I said. My husband passed away years ago. Michael was my only child. Lauren's expression softened slightly. I know. So there isn't really anyone to tell. That answer seemed to relieve her slightly. After a moment, she said, You're still important to me, Patricia. I studied her face. In what way? You're Michael's mother. That's true. And you've been supportive when I needed it. Her choice of words caught my attention. When I needed it. Not when she still needed it. Past tense. I leaned back again. Lauren, do you love Jason? She looked surprised by the question. Yes. How long have you been together? Almost 3 years. 3 years. Which meant she had started dating him just 2 years after Michael died. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. People grieve differently. Some move forward quickly. Others never truly move forward at all. Does he treat you well, I asked? Lauren nodded. He does. That answer sounded sincere. Then I'm glad, I said quietly. Her eyes widened slightly. You are? Yes. Lauren seemed genuinely surprised. I thought you might be angry that I moved on. No, I replied. Michael would never have wanted you to spend the rest of your life alone. The truth of that statement settled quietly between us. Michael had always been a practical man. He believed in living fully, even after loss. Lauren looked down at the counter again. I loved him, she said softly. I know. I still do. I believe you. But loving someone doesn't mean you stop living, she continued. No, I agreed, it doesn't. For the first time since I arrived, the conversation felt less tense, almost reflective. But the larger issue still remained. After a few minutes, I asked another question. What does Jason think about Michael's story being part of your social media account? Lauren looked slightly uncomfortable. He understands it's part of my brand. Your brand? Yes. You mean the Instagram account? Lauren nodded. It helps people relate to me. How so? People connect with stories about resilience, she explained, about rebuilding after tragedy. I thought about the videos I had seen the night before, the speeches, the captions, the followers. Does Jason ever appear in those posts, I asked? No. Why not? Lauren gave a small shrug. The audience expects a certain narrative. That answer troubled me. So you present yourself as a widow. I was a widow. Yes, I said carefully. But you're not anymore. Lauren didn't respond. Instead, she asked quietly, Are you judging me? I shook my head. No. But internally, I was beginning to understand something deeper about the life she had built. Lauren wasn't just rebuilding after tragedy. She was also shaping a story that worked well online, a story that attracted sympathy, a story that helped her brand grow. And part of that story still relied on Michael's memory. After another pause, I asked something else. Lauren, how many followers do you have now? She seemed surprised I knew about the account. About 85,000. That's impressive. It's taken a lot of work. I believe that. Building an online audience isn't easy. Still another thought surfaced. Do they know you remarried? Lauren hesitated. No. Why not? Because it would confuse the message. The honesty of that answer was almost startling. So the story works better if you're still the widow. Lauren didn't answer, but the silence was enough. At that moment, I realized something important. Lauren hadn't just rebuilt her life. She had built a narrative, a carefully crafted image of resilience, and my son's memory had become part of that image, just as the money I sent had quietly supported it. I stood up slowly. I think I should head back to my hotel, I said. Lauren looked surprised. You're not staying for dinner? No. You could meet Jason. I'm sure I will someday. She stood as well. Patricia, I hope this conversation doesn't change everything between us. I looked at her carefully. Everything was already changing, I said gently. I just didn't know it yet. Lauren walked me to the front door. As I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun was beginning to soften. Across the street, Dorothy Whitman sat quietly on her porch, watching, waiting. I walked down the driveway toward my rental car, and as I opened the door, one final realization settled in my mind. For 5 years, I believed my promise to Michael meant protecting Lauren. Now I was beginning to wonder if honoring that promise meant something entirely different. The drive back to my hotel felt longer than the trip to Lauren's house. Not because of traffic. Scottsdale's roads were still wide and quiet in the late afternoon, but because my thoughts had become heavier. Every conversation from the past 5 years replayed itself in my mind. Lauren telling me about high rent. Lauren mentioning the stress of unpredictable work hours. Lauren thanking me repeatedly for the financial help. At the time, those conversations had reinforced my belief that the support I was sending truly mattered. Now they felt different. Not entirely false, but incomplete. When I arrived at the hotel, I sat in the car for several minutes before going inside. I wasn't angry in the explosive sense people often imagine. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't crying. Instead, I felt something quieter, something deeper, disappointment. Not just in Lauren, but in myself. Because I had never once asked questions. I had assumed she needed help, assumed she was alone, assumed that my promise to Michael meant continuing those payments forever. Inside the hotel room, I placed my purse on the small desk near the window and sat down on the edge of the bed. The room overlooked a row of palm trees swaying gently in the warm Arizona breeze. For a moment, I simply watched them move. Then I reached for my phone. There was one person I needed to speak with before making any decisions. Robert Delgado. Robert had been a close friend of my late husband for nearly 30 years. He was also a lawyer, practical, direct, and rarely surprised by anything. He answered on the second ring. Patricia, he said warmly, I wasn't expecting a call from Arizona. You know I'm in Arizona. You mentioned it last week. I had completely forgotten. Yes, I said. Well, I've discovered something while I'm here. Something serious. Potentially. There was a pause. Tell me. So I did. I told him about Dorothy Whitman's phone call, about the house, about Lauren's Instagram account, about the life insurance policy, about Jason, about the marriage. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he let out a slow whistle. That's quite a story. Yes, and you've been sending her $65,000 a year. For 5 years, $325,000 total. Yes. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question I had been avoiding. What exactly do you want to do about it? I'm not sure. Do you want the money back? That doesn't seem realistic. You're correct, he said. Why? Because you sent the money voluntarily. I know. There were no contracts. No. No written agreement about how it had to be used. No. Robert sighed. Then, legally speaking, it was a gift. I had expected that answer. So there's nothing I can do. Legally, he said. Probably not. That doesn't surprise me. But the legal side isn't really the main issue here. No. No, Robert continued. The real question is whether you intend to keep sending the money. I leaned back against the headboard. That's what I'm trying to decide. Well, Robert said, let's look at the situation clearly. I'm listening. Your original reason for sending the money was what? To support Lauren after Michael died. Because you believed she needed help. Yes. And now I know she had over $1 million in insurance money. And a new husband. Yes. And a house worth $800,000. Yes. Robert paused. Then he said something very simple. Patricia, she doesn't need your money anymore. The truth of that statement settled quietly in the room. I had already realized it. But hearing someone else say it made the situation clearer. I suppose you're right. More importantly, Robert continuing the payments could actually create a strange dynamic. How so? You might end up financially supporting a married couple who are already doing quite well. I hadn't thought about it that way. That would feel odd, I admitted. Exactly. I stared out the hotel window again. Palm leaves rustled softly in the evening breeze. What would you do? I asked. Robert laughed lightly. You're asking a lawyer or a friend? Both. As a lawyer, he said I would recommend ending the payments. And as a friend, I would recommend the same thing. Why? Because your promise to Michael was about care, Robert said, not about unlimited financial support. I considered that carefully. He continued, You've already helped her more than most people ever would. I didn't do it for recognition. I know. But promises also have boundaries. The word boundaries echoed in my mind. For 5 years, I had never considered that my promise might have limits. But perhaps it always had. I suppose the real question, Robert said gently, is whether you still believe Lauren needs your protection. I thought about her standing in the bright Scottsdale kitchen. Confident, comfortable, secure. No, I said quietly. I don't. Robert exhaled softly. Then the decision seems fairly straightforward. Yes, but he added there's another question you should think about. What's that? What do you want to do with that money instead? I hadn't considered that yet. For the past 5 years, that $65,000 had a purpose, Robert said. If you stop sending it to Lauren, you might want to decide where it should go. I thought about that, and suddenly a memory surfaced. Michael standing proudly beside his fire truck. The pride in his voice the day he told me he wanted to help people. Mom, he had said back then, I want to do something that matters. The memory settled gently in my chest. Robert, I said slowly. Yes, I think I might have an idea. What kind of idea? Something that would still honor Michael. I like the sound of that. I smiled faintly. So do I. After we hung up, I sat quietly in the hotel room for several minutes. For the first time since arriving in Arizona, my thoughts felt clearer. Lauren had moved forward with her life, and that was her right. But the promise I made to Michael didn't have to disappear. It just needed a new direction. And tomorrow, I intended to tell Lauren exactly what that direction would be. The next morning in Scottsdale arrived bright and cloudless. Arizona mornings have a different quality than the ones back in Colorado. The light seems sharper, more direct, as if the sun has no patience for hesitation. I woke earlier than usual, long before the hotel hallway began to fill with the sounds of other guests starting their day. For the first time since Dorothy Whitman's phone call, my thoughts felt settled. Not completely peaceful, but settled. The conversation with Robert Delgado the night before had helped more than I expected. Sometimes clarity arrives not through emotion, but through calm, practical reasoning. Lauren didn't need my financial support anymore. That part was undeniable. But the promise I made to Michael still mattered to me, and I had begun to realize something important about promises. They are not always fulfilled in the exact way we imagine when we make them. I dressed slowly, then walked down to the hotel cafe for breakfast. The dining area overlooked a small courtyard filled with desert plants and tall palm trees. A few other guests sat quietly at tables, sipping coffee while reading their phones. The peaceful atmosphere gave me time to think. Michael had loved helping people. Even as a teenager, he volunteered with community groups. In college, he spent weekends assisting with emergency training programs. And when he became a firefighter, he spoke about the job with a sense of purpose that always made me proud. He didn't just want a career, he wanted to make a difference. As I finished my coffee, the idea that had started forming the night before began to take clearer shape in my mind. By the time I returned to my hotel room, I knew exactly what I was going to do. But first there was one more conversation that needed to happen. I picked up my phone and sent Lauren a short message. Are you home this morning? I'd like to talk. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Yes, Jason left early for work. You're welcome to come by. The drive back to her house felt very different from the one the previous afternoon. Yesterday I had been uncertain, confused. Now I felt something closer to resolve. When I arrived, Lauren opened the front door before I even reached the porch. Good morning, she said. Good morning. She stepped aside to let me enter. The house looked just as elegant in the morning light as it had the day before. The large windows filled the living room with sunshine, and the pool outside reflected bright blue ripples across the ceiling. Lauren gestured toward the couch. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. We sat across from each other in the living room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Lauren studied my face carefully. You look different today, she said. How so? Calmer. I slept well. That's good. She waited a moment, then asked the obvious question. Did you have time to think about everything? Yes. And I folded my hands together in my lap. I spoke with Robert Delgado last night. Lauren frowned slightly. The lawyer? Yes. What did he say? He confirmed something I already knew. What's that? That legally speaking, the money I've been sending you is considered a gift. Lauren's shoulders relaxed slightly. I figured as much. I'm sure you did. Another brief silence followed. Then Lauren asked the question she clearly wanted answered. So what happens now? I looked around the living room one more time. The modern furniture, the large art pieces on the walls, the quiet luxury of the space. Then I looked back at her. I'm going to stop sending the payments. Lauren's expression changed instantly. Not shock, not anger, but a small, sharp disappointment. I see, she said. You probably expected that. Yes. She leaned back against the couch. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. I'm glad we understand each other. Lauren crossed one leg over the other. So that's it. Not exactly. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. What do you mean? I've decided to do something else with the money. Lauren watched me carefully. What kind of something? A scholarship fund. A scholarship. Yes. In Michael's name. The room grew quiet. Lauren seemed genuinely caught off guard by that answer. A scholarship for what? For young firefighters, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. Firefighters. Yes. Why? Because that's what Michael loved. Lauren looked down at the floor for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. That sounds meaningful. I think it will be. How much money are you planning to put into it? At least $65,000 a year, the same amount I had been sending her. Lauren understood the implication immediately. She nodded slowly. So the promise you made to Michael, you're still keeping it? Yes, just differently. Exactly. Lauren sat quietly for a long moment. Then she said something that surprised me. I think he would like that. You do? Yes. She looked toward the window, watching the sunlight ripple across the pool. Michael cared about helping people, she said. He did. I remember how proud he was when he became a firefighter. I smiled faintly. So do I. Lauren turned back toward me. I want you to know something, she said. What's that? I never meant to hurt you. I believe that. I just didn't think the details mattered. They mattered to me. I understand that now. For a moment, we sat together in silence. The tension between us felt lighter than it had the day before. Not gone, but softened. Finally, Lauren asked one last question. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, not even a little. No. She studied my face carefully. Why not? I thought about the answer before speaking. Because anger wouldn't honor Michael. Lauren looked down again. And forgiveness does. Yes, but forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. I know. Lauren stood up slowly. Would you like to see the backyard before you go? She asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We walked together through the glass doors toward the patio. The pool sparkled in the morning sunlight. Birds chirped softly from the desert trees nearby. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. And as I stood there beside the water, I realized something important. The promise I made to my son hadn't been broken. It had simply found a new purpose. Lauren and I stood quietly beside the pool for a few moments after our conversation about the scholarship fund. The water shimmered under the late morning sun, reflecting light onto the patio walls. The Arizona sky stretched above us in a clear, endless blue. It was the kind of calm morning that made the world seem simple. But the past 5 years had not been simple. Not for me, and not for Lauren either, I suspected. She leaned lightly against the metal railing near the pool and watched the water ripple. I remember the first time Michael brought me here, she said suddenly. I looked at her. Here, Scottsdale. Yes, she replied. It was about a year before he died. We came down for a weekend trip with some of his firefighter friends. I hadn't known that. Michael hadn't mentioned it to me. He loved the desert, she continued. Said the sky felt bigger here. That sounds like him, I said. Lauren smiled faintly. For the first time since I arrived, the conversation felt less guarded. Less like a negotiation, and more like two people remembering the same man. He used to talk about starting a family, she added quietly. My chest tightened slightly. Yes, I said, he told me that too. Lauren looked out toward the fence surrounding the yard. We thought we had time, she said. The sentence hung in the air between us. We thought we had time. That was the cruelest illusion life often gives people. I'm sorry you lost him, I said gently. Lauren glanced at me surprised. You're apologizing to me. Yes. Why? Because losing Michael changed both of our lives. She nodded slowly. That's true. For a moment, neither of us spoke again. Then Lauren said something that surprised me. I didn't always know what to do after he died. I waited. Everyone expected me to be the grieving widow forever, she continued. Did they? Some people did, she said. Others expected me to move on quickly. That must have been difficult. It was confusing, she admitted. Lauren turned toward me again. When I met Jason, I wasn't looking for a relationship. How did you meet him? At a charity event, she said. One of the local real estate groups was sponsoring a fundraiser. What kind of fundraiser? For firefighter families, she replied. The detail made me pause. That seems appropriate. Yes, she said. Jason had lost a cousin who was a firefighter a few years earlier. I didn't know that. We started talking that night, Lauren continued, and eventually we started seeing each other. Her tone was calm, reflective. Did it feel strange at first? I asked. Dating again? Yes. Lauren nodded. Very strange. But Jason was patient, she said. He understood that Michael would always be part of my life. That's important. Yes. She looked down briefly. I suppose I just didn't know how to explain all of that to you. I considered her words carefully. You could have tried. I know, but I understand why it might have been uncomfortable. Lauren studied my face. You really aren't angry? No. She seemed almost puzzled by that. I expected you to yell, she admitted. That wouldn't solve anything. No, she agreed. The wind moved gently through the desert trees beyond the fence. After a moment, Lauren asked something quietly. What will the scholarship fund be called? I smiled faintly. The Michael Smith Firefighter Scholarship. That's a good name. It seemed obvious. How many students will it help? At least one every year, I said. And possibly more if the fund grows. Lauren nodded thoughtfully. That could make a real difference for someone. I hope so. Another silence settled between us. But this time it felt peaceful rather than tense. Finally, Lauren spoke again. I owe you an apology. For what? For not being honest sooner. I considered her words. I appreciate that. I should have told you about Jason. Yes, and the insurance money. That too. Lauren sighed. I guess part of me was afraid you would stop helping me. That fear was understandable, I said. But it also meant I wasn't making decisions based on the full truth. She nodded. I see that now. Lauren looked toward the pool again. You know, the money you sent did help me. I believe that. It gave me stability when everything felt uncertain. I'm glad it helped. But I also know it's time for that chapter to end, she said. The maturity in her voice surprised me. You're sure? I asked. Yes. You won't need the support anymore. No. Jason and I are doing well. I can see that. Lauren smiled slightly. I suppose the Mercedes gave that away. I laughed softly. Yes, it did. The sound felt surprisingly light. Then Lauren asked one more question. Will you stay in Arizona long? Probably just another day or two. Would you like to meet Jason before you leave? I considered it. Part of me felt curious. Another part felt tired. I think I'll leave that for another time, I said gently. Lauren nodded. That's fair. No, We stood there quietly for another moment. Then she extended her hand. Thank you for coming all this way to talk, she said. I'm glad I did. Her hand was warm, firm. For the first time since arriving, the distance between us felt smaller. Not gone, but smaller. When I finally walked back toward my car, Dorothy Whitman was still sitting on her porch across the street. She gave me a small wave. I waved back. As I drove away from the neighborhood, the desert sun shimmered across the road ahead of me. And for the first time since that unexpected phone call, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Because sometimes the truth, even when it hurts, is the only thing that allows life to move forward. The following day, I found myself sitting in the small conference room of a community foundation office in Scottsdale. The room was simple but professional glass walls, a large wooden table, and a view of the desert hills in the distance. A woman named Angela Brooks, who worked with nonprofit organizations, sat across from me with a folder open in front of her. Angela had kind eyes and the calm patience of someone used to listening carefully. So she said with a warm smile, "You're interested in creating a scholarship fund in your son's name." "Yes," I replied. She nodded and wrote something down. "Tell me about him." That question alone was enough to bring Michael back into the room. I took a slow breath. "My son was a firefighter in Denver," I said. "He loved helping people. That was always the most important thing to him." Angela smiled softly. "That's a wonderful legacy. He died 5 years ago in a car accident while responding to an emergency call." Her expression grew more solemn. "I'm very sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Angela folded her hands on the table. "Scholarships like the one you're describing can make a huge difference, especially for young recruits entering public service careers." "That's what I'm hoping for," I said. We spent the next hour discussing details: how the scholarship would be funded, how applicants would be selected, which firefighter training programs could participate. Angela explained that many departments struggled to support recruits financially during their training. The cost of equipment certification courses and housing can add up quickly, she said. That's exactly the kind of barrier Michael would have wanted to remove, I replied. By the time the meeting ended, the outline of the Michael Smith Firefighter Scholarship Fund had begun to take shape. The fund would support one new firefighter each year at first. If donations or investments grew, more recipients could be added later. As Angela walked me toward the building's front entrance, she paused. "Your son must have been very special," she said. "He was, and this kind of tribute will keep his impact alive." That sentence stayed with me long after I left the office, because for the first time since Michael's death, I felt like his story wasn't just about loss anymore. It was about continuation. Later that afternoon, I returned to my hotel room and opened my laptop. For several minutes, I stared at the blank screen. Then I began writing something I hadn't expected to write. An article, not about Lauren, not about the money, but about Michael. I wrote about the day he decided to become a firefighter, about the pride in his voice when he graduated from training, about the quiet courage it takes to run toward danger when everyone else runs away. I wrote about the scholarship fund and about how small acts of support can change someone's future. The article took nearly 2 hours to finish. When it was done, I sent it to a small regional publication that often covered community initiatives. I didn't know if they would publish it, but it felt important to share the story. That evening, as the sun began to set behind the desert hills, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Lauren. "Did everything go well today?" I hesitated before responding. Then I typed back, "Yes, the scholarship fund is moving forward." A few moments passed. Then another message appeared. Michael would be proud. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Finally, I replied with a simple answer. "I hope so." The following morning, something unexpected happened. My phone began ringing, then ringing again and again. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but when I checked my email, I realized something else had happened. The article I had written had been published online overnight. Not only that, it had already been shared across several firefighter community pages. The response was overwhelming. Messages from firefighters across the country, parents of recruits thanking me for creating the scholarship, even a few young trainees asking how they could apply. One message in particular stood out. It came from a firefighter captain in Colorado. "Ma'am, your son trained with our department briefly during a joint program years ago. I remember him clearly. He had the kind of courage that inspires the whole team. This scholarship will help carry that spirit forward." I read the message twice. Then I sat quietly in the hotel chair by the window. The Arizona sky stretched wide and blue above the city. 5 years ago, Michael's story had ended in tragedy, but now in some small way it was beginning a new chapter. Later that afternoon, another message arrived, this time from Lauren. "Your article is everywhere. People are sharing it." I smiled slightly. I wasn't expecting that. Her response came quickly. "You should see the comments." I opened the link again. Thousands of people had already reacted to the article. Some shared their own stories of firefighters they had lost. Others simply wrote words of gratitude. Lauren sent one more message. "I think Michael's story is helping people." I looked at the screen thoughtfully. For years, Michael's memory had been tied to grief. Now it was becoming something else, a source of inspiration, a reminder of service, a legacy that could actually change lives. And for the first time since that strange phone call from Dorothy Whitman, I realized something unexpected. Sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a promise. Sometimes it reveals the better way to keep it. The morning after the article was published, I woke to a phone filled with notifications, messages, emails, missed calls. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, slightly overwhelmed. When I wrote the article about Michael and the scholarship fund, I had imagined a few people might read it. Maybe some local firefighters, perhaps a handful of community members. I hadn't expected it to spread the way it had. Overnight, the story had been shared across firefighter associations, training academies, and community pages across several states. My inbox now contained messages from people I had never met. A training instructor from Nevada wrote that the scholarship would help one of his most promising recruits stay in the program. A young woman from Oregon explained that she had always dreamed of becoming a firefighter, but worried about the cost of equipment and certification. Even a retired firefighter from Texas sent a message thanking me for honoring the profession. Each message carried the same theme. Michael's story mattered, not just to me, but to people who believed in the same kind of service he had believed in. I sat quietly at the small desk in my hotel room and read each message slowly. By the time I finished, the sun had climbed high above the desert horizon. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time it was from Dorothy Whitman. I just read the article about your son. I smiled. Dorothy had been the unexpected beginning of all this. Without her phone call, I might never have discovered the truth about Lauren's life. And without that discovery, the scholarship might never have existed. I replied, "Thank you for telling me the truth." A moment later, she responded, "Sometimes truth causes pain at first, but sometimes it also leads to something good." Her words felt wiser than she probably realized. Later that afternoon, I received another call. This one from Robert Delgado. Well, he said, "The moment I answered it, looks like you've started something quite remarkable. You saw the article. Everyone has seen the article." I laughed softly. That was not the plan. Plans rarely matter once a good story catches people's attention. I suppose that's true. Robert paused. "Have you seen the donation page yet?" "What donation page?" "The foundation created one this morning." I opened my laptop and searched quickly. There it was. A page titled the Michael Smith Firefighter Scholarship Fund. Underneath it, a short description of Michael's story and a donation link. I stared at the number displayed beside the campaign total, $27,000, raised in less than 12 hours. "That can't be right," I murmured. Robert laughed. "It's very right." I leaned back in my chair, stunned. That means the scholarship could support more than one recruit. Exactly. I sat there quietly for a moment. 5 years ago, Michael's death had felt like the end of everything. Now his story was creating opportunities for people I had never even met. It was a strange, beautiful kind of continuation. Robert spoke again. "You know what the best part of this is?" "What?" "You didn't try to punish anyone. I wasn't interested in punishment. You simply redirected the energy." I considered that. Perhaps that was exactly what had happened. Instead of turning anger toward Lauren, I had turned purpose toward Michael's legacy. And somehow, that choice had created something larger than I expected. That evening, Lauren called. It was the first time she had called me since my visit to her house. "Hi," she said when I answered. "Hi, I've been reading the comments on your article. There are quite a few." That's an understatement. Her voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before, something closer to admiration. "I think what you did is incredible," she said. "I'm glad you think so." "I mean it," she continued. "You turned something painful into something meaningful. I suppose that's what Michael would have wanted." "Yes," she agreed softly, "it is." There was a pause. Then she said something unexpected. "Jason read the article too." "Oh." He was impressed. "That's nice to hear. He said the scholarship might inspire some of his company's employees to donate." "That would be wonderful." Lauren hesitated for a moment. "Patricia?" "Yes. I want you to know something." "What's that?" "I never meant to take advantage of your kindness." I listened quietly. "I was just trying to build a new life. I understand that, but I should have been more honest." "Yes," I said gently. "You should have." She sighed softly. "I'm sorry." The apology felt sincere. And sometimes, sincerity matters more than perfection. "Thank you," I replied. Another brief silence passed. Then Lauren said something else. "I think Michael would be proud of both of us." That statement surprised me. "Both of us?" I asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because we both found ways to keep living." Her words settled into my thoughts. Maybe she was right. Grief doesn't follow a single path. Some people rebuild their lives. Others rebuild their purpose. Sometimes those journeys look very different, but both are attempts to move forward. "I hope you're happy here," I said. Lauren paused. "I am." "And Jason treats you well." "Yes." "That's what matters." She seemed relieved to hear that. "Thank you for saying that." Before we ended the call, Lauren said one last thing. "If you ever come back to Scottsdale, dinner is on me." I smiled. "I might take you up on that someday." After we hung up, I walked out onto the small balcony of my hotel room. The desert evening had turned soft and golden. Far in the distance, the mountains glowed under the fading sunlight. For the first time since Michael's death, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just peace, but purpose. And sometimes purpose is the most powerful form of healing. 2 weeks after I returned home to Colorado, the first official application for the Michael Smith Firefighter Scholarship arrived. I remember the exact moment. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The early autumn air had started turning cool, and the maple tree in my front yard had begun shedding small red leaves across the grass. I had just finished making tea when the email notification appeared on my laptop. For a moment, I simply stared at it. The subject line read, "Scholarship Application, Firefighter Training Program." My hands trembled slightly as I opened the message. The applicant's name was Daniel Reyes. He was 22 years old and currently enrolled in a firefighter training academy in New Mexico. His message was simple. He explained that his father had been a volunteer firefighter for most of his life and that he had grown up watching the dedication and courage it took to serve a community. But the training equipment and certification costs were overwhelming. The scholarship would allow him to complete the program without taking on years of debt. At the bottom of the email, he had written something else. "A friend sent me the article about your son. I hope someday I can serve people the way he did." I sat quietly in my chair for a long time after reading those words. 5 years earlier, Michael's life had ended in tragedy. Now his story was helping someone else begin theirs. A week later, I attended the small ceremony where the first scholarship recipient was announced. It took place at a local firefighter training center just outside Denver. The building was modest large garage doors, training equipment stacked neatly against the walls, and rows of folding chairs set up for the event. When I arrived, several firefighters in uniform were already gathered near the front. Some of them had known Michael. Others had only heard about him through the article. But they all greeted me with the same quiet respect. Daniel Reyes stood near the back of the room when I first noticed him. He looked nervous, tall, thin, his dark hair neatly combed. When his name was called, he walked slowly to the front of the room. The training captain handed him a certificate recognizing the scholarship. The room filled with applause. Daniel glanced toward me as he shook the captain's hand. His expression held the kind of gratitude that doesn't need many words. After the ceremony ended, he approached me carefully. "Mrs. Smith," he asked. "Yes, thank you." His voice carried a sincerity that felt almost overwhelming. "You're very welcome," I replied. "This means everything to me," he said. "Just promise me one thing," I told him. "What's that?" "Be the kind of firefighter my son was." Daniel nodded firmly. "I will." As he walked away to rejoin the other recruits, I felt a quiet warmth settle inside my chest. The promise I made to Michael had finally taken on its true shape, not as a financial obligation, but as a living legacy. Later that evening, I received another message. This one from Lauren. "I saw the photos from the ceremony today." She had included a link to a post. When I opened it, I saw something that surprised me. Lauren had shared a photograph of the scholarship ceremony on her social media page. The caption read, "5 years ago, I lost someone who believed deeply in helping others. Today, his legacy helped a new firefighter begin his journey." Underneath the post were hundreds of comments. People praising Michael, people thanking the scholarship fund, people sharing their own stories of courage and service. Lauren sent another message a few seconds later. "I hope you don't mind that I shared it." I smiled as I typed back. "Not at all." A moment later, she responded again. "Michael's story deserves to keep being told." I leaned back in my chair. Perhaps that was the most important part of all this. Not the money, not the conflict, not even the painful truth I had discovered about Lauren's life, but the simple fact that Michael's story had continued, that his courage still mattered, that his spirit still inspired people. That night, before going to bed, I walked outside into my backyard. The Colorado sky was clear and filled with stars. Michael used to love nights like this. He once told me that firefighters spend so many hours inside smoky buildings that they learn to appreciate clear air and open skies more than most people. I looked up at the stars and spoke quietly into the night. "I kept my promise," I said. The words felt different now, lighter, stronger, because the promise had never really been about money. It had always been about love. And love, when it's given, honestly has a way of finding the right path, even if that path takes time to reveal itself. 5 years ago, I thought honoring my son meant protecting someone he once loved. Now I understood something deeper. Sometimes honoring someone means helping the world remember who they were. And in that way, Michael's story would never truly end. It would continue every time a firefighter answered a call, every time someone chose courage over fear, every time a young recruit stepped forward ready to serve. That was the legacy my son left behind, and that was the promise I would keep for the rest of my life. Grief has a way of clouding our judgment. When we lose someone we love, we often search for ways to keep them close, through memories, through promises, through acts of kindness. Sometimes those promises lead us down unexpected paths. For 5 years, I believed honoring my son meant protecting the person he loved most. I gave generously because I thought it was the right thing to do. And while that generosity may have been misplaced at times, it was never wasted. Kindness is never truly wasted. What I learned from this experience is that promises are not always about repeating the same action forever. Sometimes they evolve. Sometimes the best way to honor someone is to look beyond the past and ask a new question: what would they want their legacy to become? My son believed in service, in courage, in helping strangers who needed it most. Redirecting that support toward young firefighters allowed his spirit to live on in a way I never expected. And maybe that's the real lesson. Even when betrayal or disappointment enters our lives, we still have the power to choose what happens next. We can choose bitterness, or we can choose purpose. I chose purpose, and in doing so, I found something I thought I had lost forever: peace. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever made a promise that changed your life in ways you didn't expect? Tell me in the comments. And please share where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. If you'd like to hear more real-life stories about family loss resilience and unexpected justice, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive. And sometimes stories are exactly what remind us how strong the human heart can be.